They buried my son where I could see him, but not hold him. Beneath an old oak tree in the far corner of the prison yard, just beyond the laundry building, where the ground dips slightly and stays cool even in summer. I walk past that tree almost every day, and every time I do, I wonder if he's still there, waiting like he said he would. He was only 8. His name was Eli, and he understood more about love than most grown men I've met in my life. When the hospital said there wasn't much more they could do, and when I told him I might not be coming home for a while, he looked at me without crying. He just said, "If I can't go home, let me stay where you are. I'll wait by the tree." That's what he asked for, so that's what I did. I begged the prison warden, I wrote letters, I promised to follow every rule, never make noise, never cause trouble. Weeks passed, and then one morning they handed me a box. No ceremony, no words. Just a cardboard box holding everything I had left. They thought locking me up would silence me, that after I lost him, I'd stop fighting. But they didn't understand what it means to be a mother who wasn't allowed to say goodbye. This isn't where our story begins, but it's where their silence ended. My name is Vanessa Reed. I'm 36 years old, and until everything fell apart, I worked as a trauma nurse at Riverstone Medical in South Carolina. I've spent most of my adult life watching people bleed, break, stop breathing, and trying to stop the clock before it's too late. I've closed more eyes than I can count, but none of them were his, not Eli's. Eli was my son. He was 8, all elbows and big questions, obsessed with maps and planets and anything that had wheels. He had a rare autoimmune disorder that attacked his bone marrow. The doctors said he'd need a transplant. I asked how long we had, and they didn't answer right away. That was the first time I felt the floor give way under me, and I wasn't even on a gurney. I worked the day shift when we found out. I'd go from checking vitals in Trauma 2 to holding Eli's hand on the pediatric floor during my breaks. He never complained, not once, even when his skin turned pale or when his legs ached so bad he couldn't walk. He'd smile and say, "Can you bring me a grape popsicle from the nurse fridge?" And I always did. A month into treatment, one of the younger residents pulled me aside, quietly, off the record. He showed me the transplant list. Eli had moved down, not because someone got sicker, but because someone got louder. The hospital director's son had been added to the priority pool. Eli's position dropped overnight. I thought it was a mistake. I thought if I asked the right way, someone would fix it. I filed a formal request to review the transplant criteria. 2 days later, my shift was changed from days to nights. My badge stopped opening certain doors. I was no longer allowed to access Eli's treatment records directly. When I asked why, the chief of staff said something about conflicts of interest and maintaining boundaries. I just stood there, holding a clipboard I no longer had the authority to use. I saved lives on the 5th floor while my son coughed blood on the 3rd. And the people I trusted with his life made sure I wasn't there to see it. The night before everything unravelled, Eli hugged me before my shift. He was pale, but his grip was strong. He looked up and said, "It's okay, Mom. I know you're trying." Then he went back to his book like none of it was breaking. I knew something was wrong the moment I walked into the unit and saw the empty bed next to Eli's. It had been opened for days, one of the few pediatric ICU beds we had left, and suddenly it was prepped, pristine, with fresh linens and a monitor already warmed up. I asked one of the nurses who it was for. She wouldn't look at me when she answered, said it was being reserved. I asked, "For who?" She said, "Senator Holbrook's grandson." Just like that, no shame in it, like this was normal, like some children were born with the right to breathe longer than others. Eli's vitals were slipping fast. He'd started vomiting blood the day before, and his oxygen saturation had dipped twice on my watch. I'd submitted 2 urgent requests for ICU transfer and even had a doctor co-sign the second one. But no one answered. Not officially. Off the record, one of the techs told me that Eli's case had been deprioritized. I didn't believe him, not really. Not until I found the access logs myself. I wasn't supposed to still have clearance, but someone had forgotten to fully revoke it when they moved me to night shift. I went in during a double. I waited until the admin station was empty and opened the database. It didn't take long. My name, Vanessa Reed, had been flagged in the internal donor queue, a red mark next to it. Conflict of interest. Eli's file had been modified 2 days earlier. His priority level changed. No medical justification listed. I downloaded everything I could. Patient lists, timestamp changes, transfer requests denied. I saved them onto a USB drive and erased the log trail the way I'd seen the IT team do it a dozen times before. But they still found out. The system always protects itself first. Security pulled me mid-shift, took me to a back office like I was a criminal. No one said anything at first, just sat me down, locked the door, and turned off the cameras. Then came the questions, the accusations. I told them I was a mother, that I was trying to understand why my son was being pushed aside, that I just needed someone to explain. They never told me what was happening on the 3rd floor while I was being interrogated. Never told me Eli's fever had spiked, that he'd gone into respiratory distress, that no one sat with him, that no one held his hand. He died 2 floors below me. I didn't even hear the monitor stop. When they finally let me go home, I walked into a room that still smelled like him, and everything was still, the sheets tucked, the toys untouched, his water cup still half full. The next morning, the news said, "Nurse arrested for unlawful data breach related to pediatric waitlist. They used my grief to distract from their guilt. They sentenced me to 3 years in federal prison. No leniency, no alternatives. Just a number, a jumpsuit, and a bus ride with my wrists chained to a stranger." The judge didn't look me in the eye when he read the verdict. No one from the hospital came to testify. No one said anything about why I'd done it. They made it seem like I had hacked a system for fun, like I was some bitter nurse with a grudge, not a mother who lost her son alone in a hospital bed while she was locked in a supply room with 2 security guards and no clock. I asked to attend Eli's funeral. They said no, security risk, media attention, bad optics. I offered to go in shackles to keep my mouth shut, to not even approach the casket. Still no. They sent me a scanned program with a stock image of a dove and the dates that broke me, 2015-2023. That's how they summed up my baby's life. A clip art bird and a dash. The prison wasn't the worst. It was just empty. Everything was grey, the walls, the clothes, the food, even the way people talked. No one screamed or cried. That was the part I didn't expect. You think a place full of punishment would be loud, but it wasn't. It was like everyone had already accepted the end. A month into my sentence, I got a letter. It came in a plain envelope with my mother's handwriting. Inside there was a smaller envelope, addressed to me in pencil, the R written backwards like he always did, and a note from my mum that simply said, "His last words were for you." The letter was short. Eli wrote, "If Mommy can't come home, maybe I can be near her instead. I like that tree with the twisty branches, the one we saw last year in the park. I want to be by one of those." I folded the letter and didn't cry. Not then. I just sat in my bunk and read it again, and again, and again. The next morning I asked to see the warden. It took 3 weeks, 2 formal appeals, and 1 counsellor who'd lost her own daughter to push the request through. And one day they finally agreed. His ashes could be buried in the dirt behind the infirmary, beneath a crooked old live oak tree that leaned toward the fence like it was trying to leave. The box was small. I wasn't allowed to hold it. An officer carried it, set it down, and stepped back. I knelt beside it and touched the soil. Then I looked up and whispered that I was still here. And I would be here every Sunday, waiting too. They gave me a cleaning detail in the infirmary a few weeks later. I think someone pulled strings, or maybe they just thought it would keep me quiet. Either way, it meant I had access to medicine cabinets, supply logs, old computers with outdated security. I didn't care at first, I just wanted something to do with my hands. Then I met Marcia. She was 52, worn but sharp, with eyes that never blinked unless she had to. She cleaned the floors before I came in. One day I found her staring at the inmate file on my cart. She asked if I was the nurse with the dead kid. I didn't answer. She said, "I used to work intake at a hospital, 20 years. Got canned for clocking a doctor who groped a patient. That's how I ended up here." I didn't think much of it until 2 weeks later when we were reorganising back inventory and she looked up from a dusty old medical manifest and said, "What was your boy's name?" "Eli." She froze. Then her face went pale. "What hospital?" "Riverstone." She sat down hard. "I handled transfer approvals there for 3 years, right before I got arrested. I remember his name. He was flagged on an internal list. They told us to delay admission for any case tied to a Vanessa Reed. I didn't know what that meant at the time." I stared at her. I didn't know what to say. I felt like the walls were caving in again. She whispered, "I thought I was just following orders. Turns out I helped bury your boy." I didn't yell. I didn't hit her. I just looked at her and said, "Then help me dig out the rest." After that, we started making lists, quietly. Patient IDs, priority scores, flagged accounts from other facilities. Marcia still remembered some login paths. I figured out how to make backups without setting off alerts. We used old requisition forms to catalogue the patterns, where names disappeared, how children from poorer zip codes got shuffled off the list in favour of donors or politicians. It wasn't just Eli. It never was. On Sundays I'd still sit by the tree, just me and the dirt and the wind. Sometimes someone else would pass by and nod. No one asked, but they felt it. That something was buried there, and not just ashes. Then spring came, and the tree started to bloom. It was the first colour I'd seen in months. One of the new inmates asked, "What's that tree?" I didn't answer. It started with a headline, small, barely noticed, buried under stories about budgets and war. Anonymous source alleges organ waitlist tampering in southeast region. No one connected it to us at first, but Marcia and I watched it grow, quietly, steadily, like a fuse finding its way towards something flammable. The files we sent out had been broken into chapters, each hospital its own story, each flagged name a child who'd waited too long. And in the middle of it all, we placed him. Not hidden, not softened. Just one line on the second page of the dossier. Eli Reed, removed from active transplant priority queue without cause, March 11th, 2023, 8:07 p.m, right before he died. The packet went to a reporter who'd lost his niece to the same system. He was quiet at first, didn't reply. Then one night a guard passed me in the hallway and whispered, "You should turn on the TV tomorrow." And I did. By the end of the week, Riverstone Medical was under federal review. By the end of the month, subpoenas went out to 4 hospitals, 2 insurance agencies and 1 sitting senator. They called it a systemic failure of medical ethics. But we knew better. It wasn't failure, it was design. It was someone deciding who got to live longer and who didn't. At the hearing, the hospital's CEO sat in front of rows of cameras, clean-shaven and careful, using phrases like "deeply regret" and "investigation pending." But halfway through the second day, someone passed him a printed email. The camera zoomed in as he opened it. He stared too long, and for a moment he looked less like a man in control and more like a man drowning. The email was time-stamped at 8:04 p.m., 3 minutes before Eli's vitals dropped. It was an internal message from the transplant coordination unit confirming that Eli Reed's eligibility had been overridden by special order. At the bottom of that chain, one reply had been added later. My name, my badge ID, my final note entered in the system hours before I was fired. My son is dying and no one is listening. If you bury this, he won't be the only one we lose. The room went quiet, and in that silence I felt him, like he was in the room too, sitting at the back with his legs swinging off the chair, holding his favourite book, not gone, just finally seen. They tried to erase him, but now his name is carved into the law. An amendment was drafted within a week, mandating third-party oversight for paediatric transplant decisions. They called it Eli's Clause. The guards didn't say much when they brought me the release papers, just that it was early, good behaviour. Things moved faster than expected, one said. I didn't pack fast. I walked to the tree one last time, ran my fingers through the dirt, whispered his name like a promise. They thought no one would hear me, but they heard him. I didn't go back to South Carolina. There was nothing left for me there. The house had been sold. The hospital was under new leadership. The people who used to call me by name had moved on or forgotten how. So I left. Took a bus west and got off when the sky turned open and the air stopped smelling like old paper and bleach. I ended up in a small town in New Mexico, tucked between dust and silence, where no one asked why I only had one bag or why I didn't talk much at first. I got a job at a used bookstore, the kind with creaky floors and more cats than customers. The owner let me open the shop early so I didn't have to be around people until I was ready. On weekends, I volunteered at a clinic that served migrant families. I didn't tell them I used to be a nurse. I just stocked shelves, cleaned trays, held babies while their mothers filled out paperwork. There's a drawer behind the counter at the store. Inside it is Eli's toy stethoscope, the red one with the plastic tubing and the heart-shaped chest piece. He used to follow me around the house with it, pretending to check my heartbeat, even though he knew I'd always say the same thing. Still working, kiddo. Still holding on, every year on his birthday, I send out a letter. No return address, no name, just a sealed envelope with a hospital record I saved and a small donation. I find a family waiting for a transplant and I write, "Don't let them forget you." I sign it with a circle and a line, the shape Eli used to draw when he meant to write a tree. Back at the prison, they say the oak is still standing. Some of the women leave notes there, some just sit. They call it the listening tree now. They say if you whisper something into the bark, it finds its way to someone who needs to hear it. I like that. I like thinking he's still part of something, not just a story, a presence, a root. Justice didn't answer when I screamed. It came when I wrote it down, when I stopped begging and started planting something that couldn't be ignored. I never marked his grave, but someone put a bench under that tree. I saw it once in a photo, just a wooden bench with no plaque, facing east, like it's waiting for the morning, like he's still waiting for me. Some people think justice comes in courtrooms or headlines or handcuffs, but it doesn't. Not really. Justice, if it comes at all, comes in silence, in time. In the moments when the world has stopped looking and you're the only one still holding the truth. They told me to move on, to forgive, to let it go because there was nothing left to gain. But this was never about gaining. It was about remembering, about refusing to let a child's name disappear under paperwork and excuses. If it had been your child, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent? Would you have accepted the loss? Or would you have made sure no one else would ever feel that kind of helplessness again? I wasn't a hero. I was a mother who broke, a woman they tried to bury. But I remembered where they planted me, and I grew back up through the cracks. Now I tell this story not because I need sympathy. I don't. I tell it because someone listening might still be waiting for their voice to matter. And I want them to know it already does. If you've ever been silenced, pushed aside, made to feel small by people in power, this space is for you. Tell me your story. Leave it in the comments, even if it's just one sentence. Or whisper it to someone who needs to hear it, because we don't all get justice, but we all deserve to be heard. And if this story moved something in you, if it made you remember someone or wonder what you'd do if it were you, then stay with us. Subscribe for more stories like this, stories that don't just end, they echo. Here at Whispers of Revenge, we don't scream, we outlast.